Chosen ones, you were never meant to stumble across this message by accident. There are moments in time that feel ordinary on the surface, yet beneath them, something shifts, something unseen, something that does not announce itself with thunder but with a quiet pressure in the air, like reality itself is holding its breath. May 10th and 11th are being spoken about in certain circles not as dates on a calendar, but as thresholds, as energetic fault lines where decisions, awareness, and consequences converge in ways most people will never notice, but you will. You have felt it before even if you never had the words for it. That strange sense that some days are heavier than others. That certain periods in life feel like tests disguised as coincidence. For you, this is not superstition. It is pattern recognition, the kind that makes you pause before stepping forward, the kind that whispers, "Pay attention," when everyone else is distracted. And now, whether you asked for it or not, you are standing at the edge of one of those moments. Chosen ones. There is a reason you keep seeing signs when others see nothing. It is not because the world is louder for you. It is because you are quieter inside, more observant, more attuned to the subtle shifts beneath the surface of things. And in that quiet awareness you pick up on distortions in energy that others dismiss as imagination. May 10th and 11th, in the symbolic language of spiritual watchers, are being described as pressure points, days where hidden intentions rise to the surface, where masked realities begin to slip. Do not mistake this for fear-mongering. Fear is what the unaware feel when they encounter uncertainty, but you are being asked for something else entirely. Awareness without panic, attention without attachment, because what these dates represent is not external destruction, but internal revelation. The kind that exposes what has been ignored, delayed, or denied within you. There are moments when life forces acceleration, when delays collapse, when illusions fail, when what was hidden becomes unavoidable. Chosen ones. This is the nature of thresholds. And thresholds are never comfortable. They are not designed to be. They are designed to move you, either forward in alignment or backward into repetition. You may notice as these days approach that people around you behave differently. Conversations may feel heavier. Emotions may surface unexpectedly. Old thoughts you thought you had outgrown might return with unusual clarity. This is not random. In symbolic terms, this is the mind reacting to energetic tension like a system recalibrating before a shift. And yet the most dangerous reaction is not chaos, it is ignorance. To dismiss inner signals during such a time is to walk blindfolded through a narrowing path. Chosen ones, you are not being told to fear May 10th or 11th. You are being warned not to ignore what they reflect within you. There is a pattern among those who are called aware. Before every major transition in their lives, there is a period of discomfort. Not punishment, but preparation. Life begins removing what cannot continue with you. Situations lose stability. People reveal their true alignment. Opportunities either solidify or dissolve. It feels like loss, but it is actually filtration. And filtration is never gentle when resistance is high. You may feel an urge to retreat during this time, to isolate, to question everything. That is natural. But chosen ones, isolation is not avoidance if it is conscious. It becomes avoidance only when it is driven by fear. There is a difference between stepping back to observe and stepping back to escape. One expands your vision, the other collapses it. May 10th and 11th are being spoken of symbolically because they sit near a psychological pivot point in the collective mind. Whether or not anything external happens is secondary. What matters is what becomes visible internally, what truths you can no longer negotiate with, what patterns you can no longer pretend are not repeating. There is a version of you that has been waiting beneath distraction, a version that does not react impulsively, does not chase validation, does not collapse under uncertainty. That version is not created, it is revealed when noise is stripped away, and sometimes life strips away noise abruptly. Chosen ones, do not confuse emotional intensity with external danger. When inner transformation accelerates, emotions rise to the surface like sediment in water being stirred. You may feel uncertainty without reason, urgency without direction, nostalgia for things you have outgrown. These are signals, not commands. They are asking to be observed, not obeyed. And still, there is a deeper layer to this message that many miss. The idea of regret in ignoring these dates is not about punishment, it is about recognition delayed. The regret is not that something catastrophic happens outside of you. It is that you miss the moment you were meant to understand something essential about yourself. Because life rarely shouts. It repeats, it echoes, it revisits, and each revisit becomes louder until it is acknowledged. Chosen ones, if you are reading this and feeling something stir within you, do not rush to label it as intuition or coincidence. Sit with it long enough to observe its texture. Does it create panic, or does it create clarity beneath discomfort? True signals do not confuse you permanently. They destabilize you temporarily so that clarity can emerge. There will be distractions during this time. There always are during transitional windows. Noise increases when awareness is about to deepen, not because the noise is important, but because it is competing for your attention. If everything feels louder, it is not because the world has changed. It is because your perception is sharpening, and sharpening always reveals contrast. Chosen ones, the greatest risk in moments like this is not external events, it is misalignment, acting out of fear, deciding too quickly, walking away from something that required patience, holding on to something that already ended internally. These are the subtle missteps that create regret, not destiny. You are not being asked to predict anything. You are being asked to observe yourself with precision, to notice what rises when pressure is applied, because pressure does not create character, it reveals it. And what is revealed in you during such times is more important than anything that happens around you. If there is a shift approaching, it is not designed to harm you. It is designed to expose you to yourself without filters. That exposure can feel intense, it can feel disorienting, but it is also where clarity begins to form. Chosen ones, you are not like the majority in one specific way. You cannot fully ignore what you sense once it begins to surface. You can delay it, you can rationalize it, but eventually it returns with greater precision. That is why awareness is both a gift and a responsibility. As May 10th and 11th are discussed in symbolic terms, think of them not as threats but as mirrors. A mirror does not change you. It shows you what is already there, and sometimes what you see depends on how willing you are to look without distortion. There may be moments where silence feels louder than usual, where being alone feels more reflective than isolating, where thoughts feel unusually structured, as if something is trying to organize itself within you. Do not rush to fill that silence. It is part of the process, because transformation does not always arrive with movement. Sometimes it arrives with stillness so deep it becomes uncomfortable. Chosen ones, if you ignore everything else in this message, remember this. Not all warnings are about avoiding external events. Some are about avoiding internal blindness. The real regret is not seeing what was always trying to be understood within you. And when understanding arrives too late, life simply repeats the lesson until it is finally received. So when these dates pass, and the world continues as it always has, do not measure their significance by what happened outside. Measure it by what became undeniable inside you, what truth became too clear to unsee, what illusion lost its grip, what direction finally stopped feeling confusing. Because that is where real shifts happen, not in spectacle, but in recognition. Chosen ones, you were not given awareness to live in anxiety, you were given it to navigate with precision. And precision requires stillness in the middle of noise, clarity in the middle of uncertainty, and honesty in the middle of self-deception. May 10th and 11th, whether you see them as symbolic thresholds or nothing at all, will still pass like every other day, but you will not remain unchanged if you are paying attention. You will either become more aligned with what you already know deep down, or more aware of what you have been avoiding. And in the end, that is the only prophecy that has ever mattered. Not what happens to you, but what becomes undeniable within you when everything unnecessary falls away. May 10th and 11th are framed as symbolic threshold dates, in the sense that they represent moments of heightened awareness rather than literal prediction of external events or disasters. The idea is not that something physically catastrophic is guaranteed to happen on those exact days, but that these dates act as a psychological and emotional mirror for people who are already sensitive to change, reflection, and internal growth. In this interpretation, time itself is not random noise. It becomes structured into cycles where certain periods feel heavier, more reflective, or more revealing than others. These so-called threshold dates are seen as points where the subconscious mind becomes louder than usual, and where things that were previously ignored begin to surface with unusual clarity. On a personal level, this concept suggests that hidden truths within a person's life tend to become more difficult to avoid during such periods. These truths are not necessarily external secrets or dramatic revelations, but often internal realizations about habits, relationships, decisions, and emotional patterns. For example, someone might suddenly recognize a recurring behavior they have been avoiding acknowledging, or they might become more aware of emotional attachments that no longer serve their growth. The threshold idea reflects a psychological transition point where denial becomes harder to maintain and self-awareness becomes more unavoidable. Emotionally, these dates are described as times when feelings intensify or rise closer to the surface. This does not mean emotions are caused by the dates themselves, but rather that individuals may become more receptive to what they have already been carrying internally. Stress, nostalgia, unresolved thoughts, or unprocessed experiences may feel more present during such times. It can create a sense of emotional pressure, not because something new is happening, but because something old is finally being noticed with greater honesty. In this way, May 10th and 11th function as symbolic catalysts for introspection rather than external disruption. Internally, patterns of thinking and behavior may also become more visible. People may notice cycles in their choices, repeated mistakes, or familiar emotional responses that they previously overlooked. This awareness can feel uncomfortable because it disrupts the illusion of stability or control. However, the discomfort is often interpreted as a sign of mental realignment. When long-standing patterns are exposed, the mind is forced to reassess them, which can create a temporary sense of confusion before clarity emerges. The broader interpretation of these threshold dates is that they act as reminders of personal responsibility and awareness. Instead of focusing on fear of external outcomes, the emphasis is placed on observing one's internal state with honesty. The hidden truths are not outside forces waiting to attack, but internal realities waiting to be acknowledged. In that sense, May 10th and 11th become symbolic checkpoints where individuals are encouraged, whether consciously or subconsciously, to confront what they have been avoiding and to recognize what their inner world has been trying to communicate for a long time. Chosen ones are described as highly sensitive and aware individuals who seem to operate with a different level of perception compared to the average person. The idea suggests that they naturally notice subtle shifts in energy, mood, and environment that most people either overlook or dismiss entirely. These shifts are not necessarily physical or measurable, but rather emotional and intuitive patterns that are felt rather than logically analyzed. For example, they may walk into a room and immediately sense tension even if nothing has been said, or they may feel when someone's words do not match their true intentions. This heightened sensitivity is often framed as an internal radar for inconsistency, change, or emotional undercurrents. In this interpretation, awareness is not just about intelligence or observation, but about resonance, how deeply a person can feel and interpret what is happening beneath the surface of situations. Chosen ones are often described as individuals who cannot easily ignore what they sense. Even when they try to rationalize things away, their internal perception continues to register details that others miss. This can sometimes create a sense of isolation, because what feels obvious to them may seem invisible or irrelevant to those around them. Emotionally, this heightened awareness can make experiences more intense. Positive environments may feel deeply uplifting, while negative or chaotic situations can feel overwhelming or draining. Because of this, they are often portrayed as people who need solitude or reflection to process what they pick up from the world. Without that space, the constant intake of emotional and situational information can become mentally exhausting. Another aspect of this description is the idea of pattern recognition. Chosen ones are believed to notice repeating behaviors, cycles in relationships, and subtle changes in people's attitudes over time. Where others might see isolated events, they see connections. This makes them more likely to question motives, anticipate outcomes, or sense when something is about to shift before it becomes obvious. At the core of this concept is the belief that sensitivity is not weakness, but a form of deeper perception. It reframes emotional awareness as a kind of intuitive intelligence that operates below conscious reasoning. While others rely heavily on what is directly said or shown, these individuals are portrayed as reading between the lines, interpreting tone, behavior, timing, and energy as part of a larger picture. However, this heightened sensitivity also comes with challenges. It can lead to overthinking, emotional overload, or difficulty trusting environments that feel unstable. At times, it may create internal conflict between logic and intuition. Still, within this framework, it is viewed as a defining trait rather than a flaw, something that allows them to perceive reality in a more layered and nuanced way than those who only engage with surface-level information. The main warning in this idea is not framed around fear of something external happening, but rather around awareness and misalignment within the individual. It suggests that the real risk during these symbolic threshold periods is not an outside event, but how a person responds to their own internal signals. In this view, everyone already carries subtle intuitive cues, gut feelings, emotional discomfort, sudden clarity, or repeated thoughts that feel persistent for a reason. The message emphasizes that ignoring these inner signals can create a form of self-disconnection, where a person moves forward without being aligned with what they genuinely feel or understand at a deeper level. Misalignment, in this context, means acting in ways that contradict inner awareness. For example, staying in situations that feel emotionally wrong, making decisions purely out of pressure or habit, or dismissing recurring doubts that keep resurfacing. When this happens, a person may continue moving externally, but internally they feel unsettled, uncertain, or fragmented. The warning is that during certain heightened periods of reflection, like the symbolic framing of May 10th and 11th, this misalignment becomes more noticeable and harder to ignore. Confusion is described as a natural outcome of ignoring these inner cues. It is not presented as punishment, but as a consequence of disconnect between intuition and action. When someone repeatedly overrides what they sense internally, their decision-making can become inconsistent. They may second-guess themselves more often, feel unsure about direction, or struggle to trust their own judgment. This confusion is not sudden. It builds gradually as internal signals are repeatedly dismissed. Poor decisions are also linked to this idea of misalignment. The reasoning is that when a person is not in tune with their internal awareness, they are more likely to make choices based on external pressure, fear of missing out, or short-term comfort rather than long-term clarity. These decisions may seem reasonable in the moment, but later feel incorrect or unfulfilling because they were not fully aligned with deeper instincts or emotional truth. Delayed personal growth is another key point in this warning. Growth, in this framework, is not just about external success or achievement, but about becoming more self-aware and integrated. When inner signals are ignored repeatedly, lessons that are meant to be learned tend to resurface in different forms. This can create a sense of repetition in life patterns, similar challenges, similar emotional situations, or similar internal conflicts appearing again and again until they are acknowledged. Overall, the emphasis is on attention rather than fear. The idea is that these symbolic periods simply amplify what is already present within a person. If someone is aligned with their inner awareness, these times can bring clarity and insight. If they are misaligned, the same period may highlight confusion or discomfort. The warning, therefore, is less about avoiding an external danger and more about recognizing the importance of listening to oneself before making decisions that shape future direction. Emotional and mental disturbances are portrayed in this idea not as something inherently negative or dangerous, but as part of an internal transformation process. The core perspective is that when a person is going through a period of psychological or emotional change, their internal system does not shift smoothly or silently. Instead, it often produces noticeable turbulence, Feelings like anxiety, nostalgia, restlessness, or emotional discomfort can surface more strongly than usual. Rather than interpreting these experiences as signs that something external is wrong, this view frames them as indicators that something internal is being reorganized. Anxiety in this context is not necessarily seen as a prediction of danger, but as a signal of heightened awareness and sensitivity. When the mind begins processing deeper thoughts or unresolved emotions, it can create a sense of unease because old patterns are being questioned. The brain tends to resist uncertainty, so when internal beliefs or attachments start shifting, anxiety can appear as the mind tries to adjust to new levels of perception or understanding. Nostalgia is also described as a common emotional response during this type of internal recalibration. It may arise when the mind begins revisiting past experiences, relationships, or versions of oneself that once felt stable or familiar. This is not necessarily interpreted as a desire to return to the past, but rather as the subconscious comparing old emotional states with current ones. It can feel intense because it highlights contrast, what once felt comfortable versus what now feels uncertain or changing. In this way, nostalgia becomes part of the process of recognizing personal evolution. Discomfort, more broadly, is viewed as a natural byproduct of growth. When internal beliefs, habits, or emotional attachments are challenged, there is often resistance. This resistance is what creates the feeling of discomfort. It is not framed as something to immediately avoid, but something to observe, because it often signals that a shift is occurring beneath the surface. The mind and emotions are essentially recalibrating, adjusting to new perspectives or letting go of older patterns that no longer fit. The idea of internal recalibration suggests that the human mind and emotional system function in cycles of adjustment. Just as a physical system might take time to stabilize after a disruption, the inner world also requires periods of reorganization when change is happening. During these periods, emotional intensity can increase temporarily, even if there is no external threat causing it. In this framework, these experiences are not interpreted as warnings of external collapse, but as signs that the individual is undergoing internal restructuring. The discomfort is part of the transition from one mental or emotional state to another. Once the adjustment phase passes, clarity, stability, and a stronger sense of self-awareness are expected to emerge. The core message is centered on self-reflection and clarity, emphasizing that the most significant outcomes during emotionally intense or transitional periods are not determined by external events, but by how a person engages with their own inner truth. In this perspective, life is not simply a series of random experiences, but a continuous feedback system that reflects internal awareness. Moments of intensity, whether emotional, mental, or situational, are viewed as opportunities for deeper understanding rather than events to be feared or avoided. Self-reflection becomes the key process during these periods. It involves observing one's thoughts, emotions, and reactions without immediately reacting to them. Instead of suppressing discomfort or dismissing uncertainty, the idea encourages individuals to examine what these internal experiences are pointing toward. For example, recurring thoughts may indicate unresolved concerns, emotional discomfort may highlight misalignment in a situation, and sudden clarity may signal readiness for change. The purpose of self-reflection is to translate these internal signals into understanding rather than ignoring or resisting them. Clarity, in this framework, is not something that appears instantly, but something that emerges through honest internal observation. When a person allows themselves to acknowledge what they truly feel and think, without distortion or avoidance, they begin to see patterns more clearly. Decisions become less reactive and more intentional. Emotional confusion gradually reduces as inner contradictions are recognized and addressed. Clarity is therefore described as a byproduct of honesty with oneself. The concept of regret is framed not as punishment, but as delayed awareness. It suggests that regret often arises when a person realizes, after a period has passed, that they ignored signals they were already receiving internally. These signals might have been intuitive discomfort, repeated doubts, or a persistent sense that something required attention. When these are dismissed repeatedly, opportunities for insight are also postponed. The regret, then, is not about what happened externally, but about what was not recognized internally at the right time. During intense periods, whether emotional or psychological, the potential for personal growth is considered higher because internal signals become more pronounced, thoughts feel more persistent, emotions feel more vivid, and self-awareness becomes harder to avoid. These moments are framed as windows where individuals are more likely to confront truths they might normally overlook in daily routine. Growth, in this sense, is tied directly to attention, how willing a person is to observe themselves honestly when internal pressure increases. Missing this opportunity for insight is described as a form of stagnation rather than failure. It does not mean something irreversible is lost, but that the same lessons may need to reappear later in different forms. The message ultimately reinforces the idea that life continues to present situations until they are understood, and that self-awareness is what allows those cycles to be resolved more consciously. Overall, the central idea is that the most important outcome of intense periods is internal alignment. When a person engages in self-reflection and acknowledges inner truth, they move toward clarity and growth. When they ignore it, they risk repeating patterns until understanding eventually occurs.